The golden rule of Abrahamic religions says, love your neighbor as yourself. In contrast, the ancient Chinese philosopher Confucius says, don't do to others what you don't want for yourself. These are not simply alternative formulations of the same idea. They are vastly different things. This is part of the conversation I will get into today with Daniel Chapelle. He is a psychologist and writer who has spent years exploring how to make peace with life's sources of unhappiness. He has written many books, including the book I'll be reviewing today with him, which is called A Minimalist Ethic for Everyday Life. I found it a very compelling book. We have a lot to talk about today. One of the quotes from Chapelle is, if our innermost unhappiness results from who we imagine we are from moment to moment, then freeing ourselves from it depends on becoming aware of the stories we tell ourselves and on letting go of these imaginings. This is the Buddha's great discovery. He put the ancient practice of meditation in the service of that discovery to give it directly felt and lived, not just an intellectually conceived power. Hence his teaching that you don't have to be unhappy anymore. All right, let's get to the interview. Hello, Dr. Daniel Chapelle. Welcome to the podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And I'm looking forward to discussing your work and your latest book, A Minimalist Ethic for Everyday Life. And I've been reading it, and I've been appreciating a lot of the insights that you've put in there.
Well, thank you.
And absolutely, yes. I was reading through it, and I liked how you were sort of saying up front that you felt like the wisdom is everybody's, and that you're just trying to take what you've learned from all of these different traditions and give a good outline for us. But there's some other things as well. But I thought that was pretty useful because I felt that it was explaining things that were complicated, or at least I felt complicated in the past, in a way that was kind of to the point and sectioned off and readable. So that was useful.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, that was the intention.
Yes. And I think before I get into some of the quotes from the book, I actually think that I would like to go and ask you some of the big questions, because you wrote about this book. In the book, you write about multiple different types of ideas. So we have Socrates in the beginning, Taoism, Buddhism, karmic theory, and the idea of negative ideology, and the external and internal commandments.
So negative theology.
Oh, what did I say?
Ideology.
Oh, whoops. Yeah, sorry. Negative theology. Thank you.
It's okay.
And you touch on religious traditions, but also non-religious. And so one of the things that struck me was kind of this overarching point about Western therapeutic psychology has largely failed to improve human lives. Could you expound on that a little bit?
Western psychology is very new in the greater scheme of things. It's only a good 100 years old. And so we have not made a tremendous amount of progress. We still, although lately there has been some very good work been done, there's no question about that. But we remain focused primarily on our beliefs about the personal self. We are a culture of selfies now. It's the individual personal self, me, my, mine. That is our focus. And psychotherapy, modern psychotherapy has generally continued to work within that framework, trying to make the personal self happier. The Buddhists, 2,500 years ago, have discovered that this is not the way to go. What they're into more is letting go of beliefs that we have about ourselves, because it is the beliefs we have about ourselves that contribute very largely to making us unhappy when we are unhappy. There's always, when you're sort of feeling unhappy or distressed or dissatisfied, the big question that Buddhism asks is, Where is that unhappiness? you know and in meditation, with the help of meditation, we try to find it, to locate it, but we can't locate it. And in the process, we find that what we're talking about really is beliefs or ideas that we have come to believe about ourselves, both on a conscious level and on a less conscious level. For example, if you're generally a nice, happy-go-lucky going guy, you can have very bad days as well. And where do they come from? They come from ideas that are attached to your self-image and that are a part of your self-image, and that contribute to unhappy-making thoughts and beliefs. So, for example, if you run around as a depressed person and with the belief that nobody's ever going to love you, that's really going to get in the way. If you think that you're an unlovable person, because you're not, there's no reason to believe that, but you have come to make yourself believe that, probably as a result of early and repeated experiences. But then here you are stuck with this belief, like, I'm always going to be alone, I'm always going to be a failure, or whatever it may be. And, as cognitive behavioral therapy has very clearly discovered and addressed, is those beliefs that they really cause us a great deal of trouble. But beyond that, and that's where sort of psychology has its limits, I think. Beyond that, the concrete beliefs that we have about ourselves, there is the very process of the believing and the producing of ideas that we have about ourselves, and then the believing them. So it's not enough, according to the Buddhist tradition and according to my work and my approach, it's not enough to do away with specific, or to challenge and then let go of specific unhappy making ideas and beliefs, but we have to see if we can end the very habit of getting hooked on certain beliefs. It's sort of like Velcro. You may have a piece of clothing with Velcro and it attaches to everything it can, and so it may even attach to your best suit or your best sweater or whatever, which is very annoying because that's not what you wanted. But our false beliefs about ourselves are a little bit like Velcro. The great genius of Velcro is that it is reversible. You can remove the attachment, and the same goes for these ideas we have about our beliefs about ourselves.
Do you believe that in Western therapy, the focus being so much on the individual actually could be somewhat misguided, and that perhaps the focus
Mm-hmm.
might need to be on the community and the way that things function as a society?
Yeah, well, there's that, but again, you have to be very careful because you can easily switch from believing in one person, me, the selfie, to believing in all the other people. But if you view them also as selfies, and you do that because you're on Facebook, then you're still working within the realm of identifiable, separate, independent selves.
Mhm.
And so you will be able to live a better life if you focus on community and other people, but you're still not reaching the point of greatest depth, so to speak. That point is realizing that, when I look at you, I think you're a person and I think I'm a person. And if there are like 10 peoples in your room, those are 10 people. Well, we're still stuck on the notion of individual selves, even if we're community oriented. And I think there's a big danger now that the cultural belief seems to be, the positive cultural belief seems to be, and in a way rightly so, that we have to go more toward community. But that's not enough. I mean, it's a step we have to take, no question about it. But it is not enough. We have to make the more radical step, like, I don't know if you're familiar, I'm sure you are, with cognitive behavioral therapy, where
Sure.
a major belief is don't believe everything you think. Like if you think you're unlovable or this or that, don't believe everything you think. The meditative tradition goes a whole giant step further, and it says, don't believe anything you think. That is very different territory. And there you begin to experience and see the world and understand it in a radically different way, where personal selves are no longer at the center of our attention, but a sort of a what the Buddhists call rigpa, which is awareness itself becomes the center of attention. And it's difficult to explain what that is. Actually, it's impossible to say what it is because awareness itself is not a thing or an entity. It is. We can understand it by analogies, and the analogy that many people use, and it's a very good one, I think, is that of space. Space is everywhere, but you can't point at it. You can't say,
Hmm.
oh, there's space and there is space. Well, it's everywhere. It contains everything in the world and in our experiences, but it can itself not be contained, you know? So awareness itself, or Rigpa in Tibetan, is exactly the same. It's analogous to that. We come through meditative self-care and the meditative tradition to the view that what we really are is not a personal self that can be captured with a selfie or even in community, but we are in sort of an indefinite awareness, like space is indefinite. Or there's a Greek philosopher, Anaximander, who had this notion of apeiron, which means a boundless something, It's a boundless realm from which everything appears and to which everything returns. And awareness itself is like that. You and I sitting here, we are not really persons, but we are a sort of a spectacle of awareness itself playing a role, and we are in that.
Yeah, so this is why I think in the book you're trying to teach the reader different ways of viewing the entire paradigm of what the self is and how to witness the self and to be going deeper. So, um, and you really focus on habits. Some of the habits of thinking are you feel like are wrong and can be helped by these philosophies. So, one of the things I was reading was I don't remember what page it was on, but you talked about the negative practice of letting things go.
Hmm.
And you said, through the negative practice of deliberately letting go of unhelpful and hateful thoughts, speech, actions, and habits, we begin to wake up, quote unquote. And that is what matters most here. We are not concerned with the agreeable social conduct and neighborly niceties. Much more is at stake. We wake up to bigger things. We are concerned with the deeper issues of awakening to things that are even more significant than civility and social peace. The awakening that is at stake involves freeing ourselves from the unhelpful habits with which we create unnecessary unhappiness for ourselves and others. That way, we generate more profound contentment with our life and existence. We become like mini Buddhas in our own path towards freedom from self inflicted unhappiness. We arrive at what Nietzsche called amor fati. I'm not sure if I said that right, which is love
Yeah,
of
more
fate,
fati. Yeah.
love of all that has been, all that is, and all that will be. And then we get there to the deeper place of more profound peace. It becomes much easier to love all living beings, including ourselves and others. Um, that was a long statement, but can you talk a little bit about letting go and getting to this like larger awareness that you're kind of talking about? And I believe this is one of the chapters, probably in chapter 1 or 2.
Um, yes. Again, it is trying to catch ourselves at a belief that we're constantly believing we're somebody or another at any moment, and it shifts from moment to moment. Like I'm a psychologist all of the time, but I'm also other things. I have a certain personality style or type that remains generally the same over time.
Mhm.
Um, but then there are also times when I'm just not myself and I'm, crabby as all get out or impatient or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
That's another self-identification at that time. And most of the time, we're not fully aware of what it is that is sort of the burr under our saddle, so to speak.
Right.
And that is the first thing we need to do is, when I'm cranky or in a restaurant and I'm acting entitled or, rude with the service personnel or whatever, the question is, who do I think I am at that point? And I may
Mhm.
be like a very self-involved, self-absorbed narcissist, or I may be like a child who gets angry when he doesn't get his way, or I may be like somebody who's chronically prone to being depressed and paranoid and thinking that waitress did that on purpose, like letting my dish get cold before serving it to me and so on. So the
Mhm.
first things you have to do is get a hold of that. And then the larger issue is what I was talking about earlier, is discovering that all these ideas we have of ourselves, they are um, they are in our awareness, in our consciousness. So when you ask something, when you ask, where is the stuff in your office? You can say, oh, it's there, I can see it, and whatever. But you have to then ask, well, where is the there-ness of that stuff that you're seeing in your office? Or, where is that seeing of those things? Or when you say, well, I see it, because I know it because I see it, you ask, where is that knowing? Where is that seeing? All that is in awareness itself and nowhere else. As Schopenhauer said, the world is my perception. All we
Mhm.
ever see is our perceptions. We don't see any world in itself in sort of an absolute way. All we see is our perceptions, and the same goes for ourselves. We need to, we see ourselves as whoever we think we are, but if we want to get rid of unhappy making thoughts about ourselves, we have to see that we're always constantly um, seeing ourselves as one thing or another. We're always identifying with one thing or another. And that's where the Velcro thing comes in, like these images say they stick because they have stuck to you before. These images that you're not good enough or somebody else, is more successful in their life. Those are pieces of Velcro that stick to you because you've been vulnerable to them before and they sort of keep returning to you. But ultimately, it is a question of being able to let go as of the very idea that we are a person, we are an entity, a being. No, we are like space itself. We are much bigger than that, but we can't point to it. We can't say, oh, there it is, or there it is. It's everywhere. Awareness makes every experience possible, but it can itself not be contained in any concept or idea. So
Okay,
it's
yeah.
not an easy thing to do.
Right.
With cognitive behavioral therapy, we can get to the point of recognizing familiar self-identifications. Cognitive behavioral therapy is very good at that, and it's very helpful, people who are stuck on certain notions about themselves. But there is that point where we remain at some point not fully satisfied. And in order to be fully satisfied and content with life, we
Mhm.
have to make peace. We have to make peace with all of it. And that is something we do when we step into that realm of awareness itself, when we begin to have a sense that, you know, awareness is everywhere and that whatever appears in it is as it is. We experience it for what it is, but it's not the real thing.
Mhm.
It is the only real thing, so to speak, but it's not a thing, is awareness itself.
Right. And through philosophy and through teaching, you can hopefully get to these viewpoints. And
And
I go ahead.
yeah, and mainly through meditation. The other book that you mentioned, Meditative Self-Care, is about that process of freeing yourself from these self-identifications. So together, these two books sort of belong together
Mhm.
uh, because the first one teaches on an individual level how you, as an individual, could learn to practice meditative self-care and thereby free yourself through combination of mindfulness, as is now very popular, begin to learn about yourself, and then through meditative practice begin to let go of the beliefs. And then once you have glimpses, because it's not something that happens in one fell swoop and then you're done with it,
Mhm.
you begin to grasp glimpses of, oh, what if things are like space? If my experience is like space, then what I believe about them is not really literally true. It's an image, and it's an image to which I cling. And by letting go of the clinging, I see that it is awareness itself that brings me all my experiences. So that's the first part. The second part, the second book, the minimalist ethic for everyday life, is then about magnifying that discovery, so to speak, to the level of its greatest possible philosophic significance. And that's where the ethic comes into place. It is an ethic based on sort of a negative thinking, not negative in the sense of emotionally negative or in terms of value, but of not believing anything you think. That's why Socrates said, "I don't. The only thing I know is that I know nothing." And this was not any kind of modesty on his part. He was by no means a modest person, but it was more a question of really showing that what we think we know, we really don't. That's what he did with his followers and students, is with some degree of pleasure, and I think, sort of an unpleasant kind of pleasure, he made them see that even though they were perfectly sincere in their searching and philosophizing, there was a point where they had to admit that they really didn't know what they were talking about, because they took it to be a fact, an entity, a being, or whatever. And they had to recognize that what they were believing was their own ideas,
Hmm.
not the realities per se, because the realities per se remain beyond their grasp and also beyond language, as we see in that comes up further in the book, is the notion of the tetragrammaton, the four-letter word to describe or to point to, God or supreme being,
Hmm.
Yahweh. Essentially, that is an unpronounceable word for two reasons. One is it's made of four consonants and you can't pronounce them. It's all like, you can't
Right.
pronounce it. And the other is you cannot pronounce ultimate reality, which most people call God. And so this idea is occurs in Socrates in his own way, by saying, I don't know anything. The only thing I know is that I don't know anything. And he showed that to his students as well. And, so anyway, that's this whole idea and the practice of discovering awareness itself. I've tried to make it into something that acquires greater philosophic significance, because it obviously leads into the Buddha and Buddhism, and it also leads into Chinese philosophy. Where the one Chinese philosopher, Zhuangzi, who clearly states that, actually, by the way, he has been sort of considered the first Nietzschean, 2,500 years before Nietzsche. He said most of human experiences is not about humans as beings, as entities. It's about sort of the universe, the cosmos, nature, whatever you want to call it. But it's about more than persons. So selfies never capture the truth of any experience. You know,
Yes.
to you know, you have to capture everything. And how
Right.
do you cap? You go ahead.
No, how do you capture everything when you're just a small part of it? Is that what you're saying?
Again, you say I'm just a small. No, you're not a small. You are as big as awareness itself, which is
Hmm.
by analogy as big as space itself. So ultimately, um, you are as big as all that. And the other way to approach this intellectually is by saying, try to look at one thing and think about just one thing only, whatever is in front of you on your desk there. If you try that, you'll see it doesn't work. You cannot think of just one thing. You will think of where did it come from, who gave that to me, or how is it made, or how much did I pay for that, or whatever it may be. There's always other stuff. And if you pursue that very carefully, you begin to see that every one thing that you think is a thing depends on other things that are not that thing. And it depends on other people, and it depends on other circumstances and other times. So um, um, that's how you become, like, you begin to see that I am not a little person. I am that awareness itself, and I'm in it. Um, You
Yeah,
know, like we are.
you said in the book, William Butler Yeats, how can we tell the dancer from the dance? This means how can we separate the dancer from the dance? We can't. Dancing defines the dancer. Without dancing, there's no dancer. Is that what you're sort of saying?
Yes, yes. But it is always transient, you know? So the dancer is not sort of one fixed person. I mean, that's good for the practicalities of everyday life, you know, when you go see whatever, a movie or something like that. But what the dancer really only exists when he's dancing. And so that is awareness happening, you know, when things are happening in awareness, that's reality. That's what we experience. And once you get there, you become remarkably less unhappy. You become really content, and you become like Job at the end of the book of Job, you know. Job has been suffering tremendously, and he's mad at God, and why is this? And I didn't do anything wrong, and all that. And eventually, he's got this display of the universe, of creation, of all that is in creation. And he shifts from his own usual thinking mind and theologically arguing mind to simply the vision of the universe, of the animals in it, the plants in it, the natural processes, you know, rain, snow, flowers, color.
Mm.
And so he sees all that, and then all of a sudden his misery stops. And he lived for another, I don't know what, up to 120 years or something. And he died content, it says in the text. And there are only very few people in the Hebrew Bible of whom it is said that they died content. And he died content because he let go of his personal self and the ideas that he was stuck on. Um, and so he became aware of simply the reality of all appearances, and he's just part of it. And he has no idea whether he's going to be suffering again in the future or not. But it sort of makes no difference to him anymore. He is content. And that's the kind of contentment that we can reach too. You see that on a very small scale, pedestrian level in grandparents.
Mm.
Grandparents, the way they look at their grandchildren, they're no longer involved in the battles of parenting, in the struggles of parenting, but they just adore their grandchildren. And that's a contentment of grandparents, which is a very different kind. And so we can reach that with our in our own lives. You have to get a little bit older for it, and you have to sort of practice this meditative self-care for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about that with a few other quotes from your book, but it has also reminded me of, the original story of the Buddha was sitting under the tree, and he
Hmm.
just saw like, oh, this stuff around me, this life, what's going on is just suffering, and people are in this suffering, and they're in this space where they're suffering. And so he came up with all of these ideas of how to not suffer while you're suffering, right? It's like a
Right.
mental shift, is that you
That
accept
is
that
that. Yeah, that's it.
life is suffering, and therefore you're a part of it. You are nature. Nature is in you. Like you said, like I was trying to make myself small, but technically I'm part of all of the universe, right? And so that conscious state has to come through non-attachment, which you have to kind of read the whole book and way more books to kind of understand what we're talking about. Um, but I feel like that it was interesting to me when I was reading your book. You pointed out that the Buddha had said that there was three poisons in life that really, really get to us. I mean, obviously there's expectations and all that, but he said hatred, greed, and ignorance. And I thought,
Hmm.
and it's like kind of the origins of things, right? Like, because if you're ignorant, you don't know any better than something bad happens to you or someone else. Greed, taking more than you need, leads to depravity. Could be somebody else doesn't get what they need, or you have too much, which then leads to self indulgence, other things, and then hatred of others. I thought that was pretty interesting because in the book you were talking about how you want part of the reason you're writing the book. I was kind of gathering, this is my interpretation, was that people need to be able to know these ancient philosophies because we've gone in so many cycles.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
Confucius, which wasn't even his real name, was writing all this excellent philosophy in China, and all of the leaders were ignoring him and doing all these stupid things, and then they were getting, warring factions. And it reminded me of like the Moses in the Old Testament, like keeps telling all the tribes, like, okay, follow these rules and do this, and they would never do it, and then they would keep getting in trouble. And then but you said this though, around the world, that nihilism or nihilism, how do you say it?
Both. I
Okay,
think both. Yeah.
nihilism is increasing. And so you said, as the force of nihilism increases, so do the doubts about long held ethical beliefs and practices. Nations become increasingly weak in living up to their founding ideals. The individuals who make up nations become increasingly dissatisfied, angry, hostile, and pessimistic. More and more people begin to rant and rave from a perch of moral superiority, even while their rageful conduct is inferior in ethical substance and value. And so we have growing global unrest, with many parties clamoring for rights and power, often based on nothing but assumed entitlement. Today, as Nietzsche foresaw more than 100 years ago, our nihilism is more than transient. It is no longer a temporary phase of confused adjustment. While cultural tides change, which they always and inevitably do, nihilism is now threatening to become a new world order, a world order of disorder everywhere. Self-inflicted global challenges, such an ever-widening abyss between the haves and have-nots, and all of the unrest associated with that as a result. Any thoughts there?
Well, that is where we are at, right? I
Oh,
mean,
for sure, I
everybody
see it.
can
Yeah,
see that. Well, let's look at the presidential election.
right.
That's it. That's it. But so, in a funny way, well, not a funny way, but we are at the same point where Confucius was.
Yes.
China had been, it wasn't named China yet at that time, but it was more or less unified and organized and coherent, and it was stable society. And
Hmm.
then they lost their basic beliefs, their basic morality, and what have you. And so they became a nation of warring states. For
Hmm.
200 years, they had war going on. And so Confucius arose as one of the philosophers that was hopefully going to be able to help the various rulers to restore order and peace and what have you. And so I think we are very much in the same place right now. And so what happens is in China, first they had Confucius, and after Confucius, they had Taoism, with Lao-Tzu.
Yeah.
And then, one of the later Taoists is that Zhuangzi that I mentioned. And Zhuangzi has been described by China scholars as a Nietzschean before Nietzsche, 2,500 years before Nietzsche. So I think that we are in the same place, and we need, at the end of it all comes Buddhism, in China. First it comes first to China and then to Japan, or is it the other way around? Forget it now. But so the Buddhist practice came to China as sort of the best possible way to unify Confucianism and Taoism and all the other stuff. And I think we're exactly there now. I think Nietzsche foresaw where we're at right now with this pronouncement of God is dead. That didn't mean that, some octogenarian God fell off his seat and died, but it means that all the old beliefs, they crumbled like clay feet. And that's where we're at. If you look at this country, the United States, and I'm not from here, but we are in big trouble. And I think the only way out, real way out, is not by this president or this party or that party or whatever, but by a change in consciousness, the same level and caliber of consciousness change that happened when Buddhism came to China. So that's why I think we're seeing why we have this cultural preoccupation with mindfulness and other things like that. They're very good, but they're just like the beginning. They're just, like most people don't really understand what mindfulness is all about. And so but that's where we're at now, and that's why I wrote that little book, because
Yeah.
the West, the so-called Judeo-Christian West, has been based on the golden rule: love your neighbor as yourself, which is a splendid idea. But look around you, and how well is it practiced? Not that well, correct? And
No.
it's not getting any better either. So that's why I went the route of, with Socrates and all the others that followed, and with in particular Confucius, who says, it doesn't say love your neighbor as yourself. He says don't do to others what you don't want done to you. That's a negative morality. It's about what not to do. That is easier to do than love your neighbor as yourself. You can't force yourself to have loving feelings. I mean, you may have the best of intentions, but you can't make yourself have loving feelings. So good luck trying to put that into practice. On the other hand, everybody has the capacity to refrain from acting like, horses patoot, like a
Hmm.
jerk. And so that's why I wrote that book. And it's not just about not doing bad things like not swearing or not smoking or not whatever it may be. It is the negative thinking that leads us eventually to see that we really don't know anything. The things we say we know, they're sort of handy and convenient, but they're not really ultimately true. And so we need to get more comfortable with not knowing. And that's where meditation comes in as the leading discipline of not knowing. And you just sit there and you begin to watch how your mind works. And it's pretty amazing how it works and what it does to you. Um, so, anyway, I don't know how we got started on
Yeah,
that,
well, no,
but
but that's a good point. It's why it's needed. I would say that right now, just like we have a chasm between the haves and the have-nots that you talk about, which is creating social chaos. I would say we have a chasm between those who have the time and ability and knowledge to be able to study such things and practice such things, and those who are not being taught. Our culture is kind of in a fight because it allows free speech. So we have all these great books coming out about mindfulness. Your books, we have all these phenomenal books and learnings and podcasts and even TV shows that are coming out to teach all these wonderful concepts. But the sort of the soup that we're swimming in is
I like that.
that things are not being practiced. We're learning these things, but a great deal of the mainstream of our culture is practicing selfishness, comparing each other, claiming
Hmm.
as much property or money as possible, all short-term things to try to make yourself feel better that ultimately in the long term not only harm the person who's um, in these sort of mindsets, they harm their children, they harm the culture at large, right? Greediness, ignorance, and hatred, they harm the culture at large. And so a lot of what I see in this philosophy is overcoming the ego of not
Uh-huh. Yeah.
enough. I need more, I'm better, I'm bigger, which is a defense against death. It's a defense against um,
Right.
your mortality, and how the opposite, like we talked about, the feeling of smallness, but really you're part of this, and accepting how part of it is, how do I want to live my life, how do I want to treat people around me, how do I ultimately want to leave the world. And I think
Hmm.
that is not being practiced at all much. I mean, in the mainstream in the United States. And so we see exactly what you're talking about with Confucius. Like, we have all this great knowledge. He had all this great knowledge, but everyone's ignoring him and saying, well, yeah, but let me do it my way. I'm in charge of this little whatever faction. So um, I do think that for the United States to right itself, it has nothing to do with the president. It does have to do with some policies. But really, it's this: the people that control the most business and the most capital in this country, most of them are living by a different credo than the rest of
Hmm.
us. And their
Hmm.
credo and their way of going about things, which is this myth of unlimited capital growth. It's unlimited economic growth, which you cannot have unlimited capital growth in a finite planet with finite resources and finite people who need rest. That myth is so pervasive that I believe it is causing a lot of members of society to be disgruntled and to
Yeah.
be angry and rageful and upset and to become more nihilistic, like you discussed. And thus, the change of heart is happening, I think, on a level with the younger people and with people that are reading the sort of materials that you're putting out there and listening to this podcast. But the change of heart has not gotten to the people in power, almost because they might have too much power, more unprecedented power, in fact. Thoughts?
Yeah, they would have to give up on the idea that, remember the movie with, I forget his name now, Greed is Good, you
Right, greed
know,
is good. Yeah,
greed is good. They'd have to give up on that idea, but, nobody's willing to give up on that. I think we're going to have to really hurt ourselves first in a big way. You
yeah,
know, the I have a book on the necessity of unhappiness, a paradox, which is spells out that in order for one to become motivated to change, one has to have a sense of deep-seated unhappiness, and then take on the struggle with that unhappiness.
yeah.
And in a way, that's what we have to do. We have to become, this country has to, I think Kamala Harris was talking about that the other day, and I'm not advocating one way or another, but she says we have to reinvent what it means to be an American and to be America as a country. It's absolutely true. I mean, I've been saying that for years. What does it mean these days to be American? Is to be embarrassed, is to be the laughing stock of Europe. It is to be afraid. It is to no longer have anything to be certain of, that has to change in a fundamental way. And we may have to really suffer in a very, very bad way before we begin to realize that. Um, and we have to eventually overcome this notion that the personal self is the core of all reality. The permanence of the personal self. It's essentially a form of Darwinism without recognizing itself as such. What is Darwinism? Is the survival of every creature that thinks it has to survive. I mean, creatures didn't really think I have to survive, but that's what we are doing now, and we have to get beyond that. Um, there's a line in Nietzsche which I find very profound, but most people read right over it. The line is, "We love life not because we are used to living, but because we are used to loving." That's a very different form of existence if you go through your life with loving as the basic activity of your mind or of your search or your longing, as opposed to just, continuing the way you have been living because that's what you're used to. Until we discover that fundamental loving, the kind of loving that you see it in a grandparent. Grandparents don't get hysterical about the dramatics of their grandchildren. They're more patient. They see life is ups and downs and complicated and whatever. But their love, their grandparental love is the same. It's unruffled. It's the parents who are ruffled, you know, and it is that kind of, or is Job's contentment. Um, there is a series of etchings by William Blake, about the Book of Job, and in the beginning he has the Book of Job. Everybody in the family reading the Bible, very studious, very serious. Nobody's smiling or laughing. At the end of the Book of Job, he has the whole family playing musical instruments. They're all, happy, having a good time. Whereas before, in the beginning, all these instruments were hanging silent from the trees while they were studying their scriptures. So that's the big change. Um, and there's nobody I think who can know. We maybe needed Nietzsche number two or something like that. But where we go from, he foresaw where we are at now.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. And I see that. I think, and as we've got a couple minutes left here, I feel like it really, for people to change, they do need information. They need philosophy. They need to understand their psychology of where they come from. That they need time for reflection. And I think that's another part of our economy right now, with everyone feeling like desperate to survive. You don't have a lot of time to reflect and be in community,
Uh-huh.
which is dangerous. Like you said, we might have to suffer. So you said in the book, and there's two things. I don't want to end on a negative, but I'll say one negative and then a positive. If genuine governance, and if
Yeah.
and if genuine governance of, by, and for the people, not today's oligarchic greed of under-regulated and exploitive capitalism parading as democracy, is to have a living chance, we ourselves must change. We must become more than emotionally empty consumers of bread and circuses and seekers of pleasant distractions. We must be more than gullible voters. We must become vigorous advocates, not for the continuation of the same old ways, but for a new evolutionary future. This future is not for the privileged bourgeoisie that would worship cartoonish, tyrannical supermen or superwomen as their dear leader. It is instead a future for what Nietzsche calls an overhuman, as we will see that this is a new kind of human who overcomes all that is small, petty, and poisonous to himself. So kind of having that larger perspective that I'm part of something larger, and I am a piece of information or piece of light, instead of I am so special that I deserve, all of these special things,
Yeah.
right? And so I love this part, and I think it was like kind of when you already get to this point of awareness through meditation enough. But I think Lee was the speaker, and he was talking about doing things the right way. And I thought that was interesting, because you hear that and you all of a sudden think, okay, there's authoritarianism. But what he meant by the right way was, we do everything as if it were a ritual, a ceremony in which we act with a sense of reverence. We act with a sense of presence of something valuable and sacred amid that what may seem all too profane. We learn to do everything we do for its own sake, not for a useful result or a goal outside of it. And then you said we find something similar in Taoism and Buddhism's teachers. So it's like, it's somehow getting past the selfish part of
Yeah.
the self.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where meditative self-care, that's what it's all about. It's not just about, relaxation and feeling better and building self-esteem. It's not about selfies, and it's not about, greed is good and all that, but it is about it's stepping outside of one form of consciousness into another. I don't know if you have any time left, but we used to have okay. We had a cat. When my wife and I had a cat, and she loved nothing better than to be able to sit between the two of us, with one paw on one person's leg and the other paw on the other person's leg. And I think what that was about is simply returning to that feeling, the early feeling of being in a nest with a bunch of kittens. And I think we have to do something like that. We have to develop a sense of having one hand or one foot in one world, the everyday world that we need to live in, but then another foot in the world that we all know from when we were kids. When we were babies, we were just in awe of everything, and everything made us laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was there. And that's we have to get back to, which is not just a sort of a romanticizing of babyhood, but it's a profound philosophical and religious affair. Nietzsche, when he said, our God is dead, he said, we've killed him, and so what we have to do is we ourselves have to become more divine than we have ever been, because we can't count on an heavenly afterlife. We have to make that life here. And again, that's you do with amor fati, with, we love life not because we're used to living, but because we're used to loving. But I'll get off my soapbox here.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I think the grand narratives don't keep people in line anymore. We know too much now. The masses have had far more than the printing press and the internet. So most people cannot just rely on a story of God looking at you from the sky or whatever.
We can't even rely on our Constitution anymore.
No, that's true. So I'll end on a positive quote, which is, philosophizing, so Socrates taught, must start in true not knowing, in wonder, puzzlement, and awe at the unknown. But such not knowing, wonder, puzzlement, and awe are not easy to come by. We have the capacity for them, but we must cultivate that capacity. We do so by developing a fresh sense of childlike ignorance. We must learn to feel once again ignorant so that we may rediscover wonder. We must deliberately make ourselves innocent by returning to how we were before we started having personal opinions about everything. We must stop regarding these as accepted knowledge. We must instead start from scratch with a clear and uncluttered mind, and just as importantly, with an open heart. And that's from your book, A Minimalist Ethic for Everyday Life. A Minimalist Ethic for Everyday Life. I love that quote because I feel like
Thank you.
the stress and things we lose that. We start putting our own little filter. We always have a filter, right? But we're putting way more filters on life with it when we don't have an open heart.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Good.
So, all right. So people can buy these books where?
Amazon, they're everywhere at Amazon. And if they want more information, they can go to my website, which is meditativeselfcare.com. meditativeselfcare.com. And they can also contact me through that website. And the website contains descriptions and excerpts from the 7 books. The 8th one is still in process. That's the one about the new consciousness. But so, yeah, the book, the handy book for practical living would be Meditative Self-Care. And then after that, the book to go to is the A Minimalist Ethic for Everyday Life. Those two are the best introduction to sort of all my thought. I go in other places as well, but these are the best introductions. So the website, meditativeselfcare.com.
Excellent. I will put that in the show notes, and people will be able to click on it right from there. So that'll be very good.
Sounds great. Wow.
Thank you so. Yes, thank you so much for all of your time today. I really appreciated it.
Well, so did I. I appreciate being able to talk with you. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. So, okay.
And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician podcast. If you are enjoying the show, please leave us a rating on iTunes or share the show with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. As some of you know, I am passionate about preventing future violence in the United States. I have started a nonprofit with colleagues called the National Violence Prevention Hotline, which is a 501c3 organization. We are endeavoring to gain funding and collaborators and volunteers so that we can start a 24/7 hotline and chat line to reach potential perpetrators before they may act violently. It is a bold effort to curb violence and save innocent lives by working to connect with potential offenders while they are in the planning stages of violence, help to de-escalate them, and provide resources so that they can get appropriate professional help. The National Violence Prevention Hotline is looking to open up a conversation about violence in society, the causes, and the solutions. You can learn more by visiting our website at violencepreventionhotline.org. You can get involved by writing your congressperson from our website, sharing it with your network, or even donating to the cause. If you are looking for an EMDR International Association consultant, I am a consultant and I can help provide 20 hours that you need to become EMDRIA certified. Just check out the show notes and send me a message and see if we're a good fit to work together. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment with a local counselor in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians at Health for Life Counseling in Grand Rapids as part of the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. And if you are in the state of Michigan, you can also schedule a telehealth appointment. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based upon the literature they have read and the experience in their respective fields, the information on this podcast should not be viewed or thought of as the definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you're in a crisis, please call 911 or the National Crisis Line at 988. Support your local bookstore by shopping at bookshop.org. That's www.bookshop.org. It donates a percentage of sales to local bookstores all across the United States, which I think gives character to our cities and a place to hang out and a place to explore. You can order from the comfort of your own home online while supporting businesses near you. If you are a therapist and you are not involved in your local counseling or therapist or social work organization, please get involved to at least pay dues so that we can have lobbyists help keep mental health care accessible at the government level, and also expanding into schools and other places that need it. And also, if you didn't know, counseling organizations and professional organizations are working to keep us from becoming gig workers for a lot of large corporations who are coming in and trying to buy up local counseling agencies or basically pay you what they pay for people to deliver food to your house. So, get involved. Until next time on The Intentional Clinician, I wish you all a safe and peaceful week.